So in 1536, when the Holy Roman Emperor avoided this piazza on his triumphal procession through the city of Rome, the Pope Paul III took the initiative to have this space redesigned. Michelangelo took Roman citizenship in 1537, and in fact he lived just at the foot of the Capitoline Hill on a street called the Michel de Corvi, the Butcher of the Crows, suggested there were a number of butcher shops in this area. And other artists had actually collected around this area as well. Michelangelo, who had lived here for many years of his life, had never become a Roman citizen. He is a Florentine from a whole other region of Italy, from Tuscany, and was really a citizen of Florence. He becomes a Roman citizen in 1537. And that has to be because he's been commissioned by the Pope to redesign the political center of Rome. And he can't really do that without being a Roman citizen. The first move that was made, and we don't know if it was under the impetus of Michelangelo or the Pope, was to move this statue of Marcus Aurelius here from the Lateran. Now, since the 15th century, a number of great surviving statues from the ancient empire that had been essentially preserved at the Lateran were moved progressively here to the Campidoglio, where they were more publicly available. This is the greatest surviving bronze equestrian statue from the ancient world. Now, in the Middle Ages, it was thought to represent Constantine, partly because Constantine had founded the Church of the Lateran, and it was just simply assumed that it must be a statue of Constantine. By Michelangelo's day and the Pope Paul III's day, this was understood to be the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. But Marcus Aurelius was one of the good emperors, a noble emperor, quite philosophical in fact, and so it made sense that he would be brought here to the political center of Rome. Marcus Aurelius is brought here to occupy the center, to suggest the kind of noble political rule that he represented. But in order to put him in the center of the space, they had to have a sense of where the center was. And that means they had to have some sense of a plan, some inkling of how this space was going to be organized. But we have no drawings from those early years of this project by Michelangelo. And it's also true of many of Michelangelo's projects, that they evolve and change over time. This project would have evolved over about 30 years between the moment at which Michelangelo is commissioned and the first real new construction is done here of the building of the Palazzo dei Conservatori. So the first move was moving the Marcus Aurelius here, putting him in the center, and Michelangelo designs his pedestal. Now the pedestal actually has some of the shape of the paving and the shape of the stairs that make this piazza. So Michelangelo, again, must have had some idea of where this project was going when he placed the Marcus Aurelius here and designed his pedestal. So that was the first move. The next move that was made was to create a more ordered facade for the Palazzo del Senatore, the Senator's Palace. The Senator's Palace had been accessed by a ramped step that was asymmetrically disposed off to the right-hand side, from your point of view, of the palace. Being classical, wanting to make this space a more classically ordered space, the architecture had to have symmetry. The door should be in the middle of the palazzo. And so the stairs were redesigned by Michelangelo to be a double flight of stairs, taking you up to a central door at the noble floor of the palace. Below the stairs, he installs in the middle the statue of the Dea Roma later in history. But originally, he was supposed to have installed a statue of Jupiter, or Jove, who represented essentially the greatest of the gods, in many ways the head of Mount Olympus. So the ruler of the gods becomes the ruler of the Capitoline Hill. But instead, they installed this statue of the Dea Roma, the goddess Rome. In fact, in the ancient Roman city, in the imperial city, there was actually a temple dedicated to Rome. And Rome, the city of Rome, was worshipped as a goddess all over the empire. So Dea Roma is installed under the center where the senator would stand at the top of the stairs. Under each of the ramps of the stairs were installed two figures of river gods with their symbolic devices. One represents the Nile, the other represents the Tiber, the two great rivers of the two great empires of the ancient world. And there's a certain way in which you can either read them as cascading from a central source, distributing out here into the piazza, or in some way or another collecting up to some unified central position. Those are the first moves that were made here in the piazza. They transformed the order of the space by giving it a center, they gave it an axis, and they reorganized the focus of the space, which was the Palazzo del Senatore, and gave it a greater classical formal order in its lower stories. The upper story articulation that you see came later and is a consequence of the redesign of the Palazzo dei Conservatori. So after the placing of the statue and the redesign of the stairs, the upper part of the building had to wait until Michelangelo had designed the whole space and designed the new design of the Palazzo dei Conservatori, which was really a transformation of an existing building, not a completely new building. That transformation gave the building a kind of greater formal order and dignity, but preserved its orientation. It was splayed with respect to the Palazzo del Conservatore, which means it was not perpendicular to it, it was at an angle, like this. That allowed a view out to the Roman Forum on this side, which was also part of the idea of this space, to connect it to the Forum, even though it had been reoriented to the city of Rome. So he preserved the orientation of the building and gave it a whole new front, not just a facade, but a whole new block of a front of the building. And then the move that he made was so critical for the space was to mirror that building on the other side of the axis, create symmetry. Not simplicity of shape. It's not a rectangular piazza, it's wedge-shaped, like the Roman Forum was wedge-shaped. The Roman Forum defined by two basilicas on either side that opened towards the tabularium. In this case, the buildings opened towards the Palazzo del Senatore and pinched down towards the center of the city of Rome, as it was in Michelangelo's day. But that symmetry gave this space the sense of being a room, gave it a sense of containment and a sense that it was actually a defined space, a space like a room but without a ceiling. So we get that sense of being in a space that has a very clear sense of edge, a sense that we know when we're in the space and where its limits are, but it also has thresholds and windows, places that we can look out from it beyond. So as we look out to the Roman Forum, or arrive to it up the Cordonata, the ramp steps that he gave to this piazza. And we arrive at it at a threshold moment that suggests we've entered into a special space, a room, a reserved place, a temenos, like the Roman Forum. But now let's talk about the Palazzo del Conservatore, the building that had such an enormous influence on the later history of architecture and really transformed the way people thought about the classical language of architecture, the relationship between buildings and space, and the nature of how you represent a political idea of formal order.